Hello, everyone. If you enjoy my channel, please support me with one like, one subscribe, and one share.
I was shocked by $1. Have you ever looked at something so ordinary that you almost ignored it, only to discover it could completely change the way you see happiness? That happened to me on a perfectly normal afternoon in the United States. I wasn't standing in a famous place. There was no dramatic music, no life-changing speech, and no miracle waiting around the corner. There was only a small screen at a checkout counter asking a simple question. Would you like to donate $1 today? I almost pressed no. What happened during the next 5 minutes left me speechless, challenged everything I believed about generosity, and quietly transformed the way I look at family, love, and even the way I practice English every single day. My name is Emma, and this is my real story. I live a peaceful life with my husband and our children in the United States. Our days are wonderfully ordinary. We rush through school mornings, grocery shopping, work deadlines, soccer practice, family dinners, and the endless search for missing socks. Nothing about my life would make headlines. Yet, one tiny moment inside a neighborhood grocery store became the beginning of a lesson I never expected to learn. Almost every customer in front of me pressed yes when the donation question appeared on the payment screen. $1, sometimes $3, sometimes $5. No one hesitated very long. No one looked rich. The young college student carrying instant noodles donated. Even a tired mother pushing to screaming children smiled and tapped yes. I stood there wondering if everyone knew something I didn't. Why Americans donating because they had more money? Or was there another reason hidden beneath these tiny acts that outsiders rarely notice? When it became my turn, my finger floated over the screen. Yes or no. It should have been the easiest decision of the day. Instead, it felt surprisingly heavy. I chose no. No one judged me. No one stared. The cashier smiled exactly the same way, but somehow, I was the one judging myself. As I walked toward my car, I couldn't stop thinking about that tiny button on the screen. Why did such a small decision stay in my mind for hours? Why did it feel bigger than $1? That evening, I casually asked my husband, "Why do so many people donate here?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he smiled in a way that made me realize this conversation was about to become much deeper than I expected. "It's not really about the dollar," he finally said. "It's about the person you become every time you choose to give." I laughed. Honestly, I thought he was being dramatic. How could $1 possibly change anyone? But over the next several weeks, I started paying closer attention. I noticed donation jars in coffee shops, food drives at children's school, neighborhood charity walks, local animal shelters asking for volunteers, and families quietly helping people they didn't even know. Something connected all these moments, yet I couldn't quite explain it. Around the same time, I found myself practicing simple English expressions during everyday conversations. Phrases like "I'd like to help," "every little bit counts," and "thank you for your kindness." They were short, easy to understand, and surprisingly powerful because they weren't just vocabulary anymore. They carried emotion. They carried real life. Then something happened that completely changed my opinion forever. It involved my daughter. A single folded dollar bill, and a decision she made without asking any adult first. What she did that day made me realize I had misunderstood generosity all along. And when I discovered where that dollar finally ended up, I couldn't hold back my tears. The secret behind the donation box. The most surprising lesson about generosity did not come from a millionaire, a celebrity, or a motivational speaker. It came from a little girl carrying a wrinkled $1 bill in her tiny hand. I almost stopped her because I thought she was making a mistake. A few minutes later, I realized the mistake was mine. What I witnessed that afternoon answered the question I had been living in my mind ever since I pressed no at the grocery store checkout, and it completely changed the atmosphere inside our family. A few days after that conversation with my husband, I volunteered at an elementary school event where parents, teachers, and children gathered for a weekend community fair. There were colorful booths, homemade cookies, games, music, and laughter everywhere. Near the entrance stood a simple donation table collecting money for local families facing unexpected medical emergencies. It looked so ordinary that many people walked past it without stopping. Then I noticed a young girl, probably no older than 7, slowly reaching into her jacket pocket. She carefully unfolded a single dollar bill. It was old, soft, and covered with tiny wrinkles, as if it had been carried around for a very long time. I smiled and assumed she was just curious. Instead, she quietly placed the dollar into the donation box. One of the volunteers gently asked, "Are you sure?" The little girl nodded. She answered in a calm voice I will never forget, "My mum says someone else needs it more today." No applause, no cameras. No one even seemed surprised. People simply smiled and continued enjoying the event. But I stood there frozen. That one sentence stayed with me long after the fair ended. Later that afternoon, I discovered something even more touching. The girl's mother wasn't wealthy at all. She worked long hours, raised her daughter with incredible patience, and still believed that kindness should never depend on the size of a bank account. Watching them together made me realize why I'd been so confused in the grocery store. I had been measuring generosity with numbers, while they were measuring it with the heart. On the drive home, I couldn't stop thinking, maybe this was why I kept seeing donation boxes everywhere in the United States. Grocery stores, libraries, schools, animal shelters, community centers. They weren't simply asking people for money. They were quietly inviting people to practice compassion. That evening, during dinner, I asked my children a simple question. What does giving mean? I expected answers about money or gifts. Instead, my son smiled and said, "Helping." My daughter whispered, "Sharing." My husband added, "Belonging." I looked around the table and suddenly understood something beautiful. The conversation itself was already changing us, since I also enjoy improving my English through everyday life. I wrote 3 short sentences in my notebook that night. Kindness costs little. Every small gift matters. Giving brings people together. They were easy to read, easy to repeat, and somehow easier to remember because each sentence now carried a real memory instead of just vocabulary. Researchers often say that acts of kindness can activate the brain's reward system, releasing chemicals linked to happiness and emotional connection. Listening to that explanation made sense, but seeing it with my own eyes made it unforgettable. I wasn't watching a theory anymore. I was watching a culture where ordinary people quietly chose generosity again and again without expecting recognition. I believed I finally understood the secret. I was wrong. Only a few days later, my own family faced a moment that would test everything I had just learned. It happened without warning, and for the first time, we were no longer the people deciding whether to help someone else. We were the ones who unexpectedly needed kindness ourselves. The day kindness came back to me, I used to believe generosity was something you chose to give away. I never imagined there would come a day when I would be standing on the other side, quietly hoping someone would choose to give to me. That moment arrived without warning, and it didn't happen during a major disaster or a dramatic emergency. It happened on an ordinary weekday in America, when one unexpected phone call turned a peaceful afternoon into one of the most emotional days my family had ever experienced. Looking back now, I realized that this was the day I truly understood why so many Americans keep giving. It started just after lunch. I received a call from my daughter's school. She wasn't seriously hurt, but she had suddenly become ill during class. I drove there immediately, my heart racing much faster than the speed limit allowed me to drive. By the time I arrived, she was already resting in the nurse's office. She smiled when she saw me, trying to be brave, but I could tell she didn't feel well. As every parent knows, seeing your child uncomfortable makes everything else disappear. The school nurse explained that my daughter would be fine after some rest and a medical checkup, but she recommended taking her home for the day. While we gathered her backpack and jacket, one of her teachers quietly handed me a small envelope. "I think this belongs with you," she said gently. I looked confused. Inside was a handwritten card signed by several classmates. There were colorful drawings, little hearts, funny stickers, and short messages wishing my daughter a quick recovery. One sentence caught my attention immediately. "We hope you feel better soon. We are thinking about you." Simple, clear, warm. As someone who enjoys learning English through real conversations, I smiled because these were exactly the kind of everyday expressions that textbooks teach, but real life makes unforgettable. That tiny card became one of the most meaningful English reading lessons I had ever experienced. Then something even more unexpected happened. The teacher pointed toward another envelope. "This class collected something for your family." I opened it carefully. There wasn't a huge amount of money inside. Just small bills. $1, $5, a few coins. Each gift was tiny. Together, they meant everything. I immediately shook my head. "Oh, we can't accept this." The teacher smiled kindly. "Please don't take away their chance to help." Her words stopped me completely. For weeks I had been asking why Americans donated so often. Now I was learning another answer. Sometimes accepting kindness is just as important as offering it. On the drive home, my daughter held the little card against her chest. She whispered, "Mom, everyone was so nice." I squeezed her hand. "So were you," I replied. She looked at me with innocent curiosity when I smiled. "The day you shared your lunch with your friend who forgot hers. The day you helped the new student find her classroom." Kindness has a funny way of remembering people. She stayed quiet for a moment before saying softly, "Maybe that's why people keep giving." I don't think she realized how deeply those words touched me. That evening, our family talked for hours about gratitude instead of worrying about the difficult day. We repeated another simple English phrase together. "Thank you for your kindness." It sounded so ordinary, yet it carried more emotion than ever before because now we truly understood it. Psychologists often explain that communities become stronger when people trust one another and believe small actions matter. Sitting around our dinner table, I realized I was watching that idea come alive. No grand speeches, no heroes, just ordinary neighbors, teachers, parents, and children quietly creating a circle of generosity. I thought the story ended there. It didn't. Only 3 days later, while cleaning my daughter's backpack, I found something hidden inside that no teacher had mentioned, no classmate had talked about, and no one in my family expected to see. The moment I unfolded that tiny piece of paper, I felt tears fill my eyes before I had even finished reading the first sentence. The note hidden inside the backpack. I expected to find homework, snack wrappers, and maybe another missing pencil inside my daughter's backpack. Instead, I discovered a folded piece of paper that completely stopped me in my tracks. It wasn't from her teacher. It wasn't from the school. There was no signature, no fancy design, and no name written anywhere. Just a few simple words in neat handwriting. Those words revealed a quiet act of kindness that no one had talked about. And in that moment, I realized the greatest generosity is often the kind nobody ever sees. I carefully unfolded the note while standing at the kitchen counter. My daughter was upstairs taking a nap, and the house was unusually quiet. Written in blue ink were just 2 short sentences. "Thank you for always helping people. Now it's our turn to help you." There was nothing else. No clue about who had written it. No explanation. I read those 2 sentences again and again. The paper wasn't expensive. The handwriting wasn't perfect. Yet somehow it felt more valuable than any gift I had ever received. When my daughter woke up later, I showed her the note. She looked at it for a long moment before smiling. "I think I know who wrote it." I expected her to tell me a name immediately. Instead, she shrugged. Actually, maybe I don't. She explained that during the school year she had helped several classmates in little ways. Sometimes she shared her crayons. Sometimes she invited a lonely student to sit with her during lunch. Once she stayed after class to help clean up without being asked. None of those moments seemed important at the time. But someone had remembered. That realization stayed with me all evening. We often imagine kindness as something dramatic, a huge donation, a grand speech, or a life-changing rescue. Yet, the moments that shape people's hearts are usually much quieter. A smile, a conversation, a patient teacher, a child sharing half of a sandwich. That night, while making dinner, I asked my husband, "Do you think people remember every good thing we do?" He smiled while setting the table. "Not every single one." He paused, "But people always remember how you made them feel." His answer reminded me of another simple English sentence worth practicing. Kindness is never wasted. I repeated it several times while washing the dishes. It was easy English, easy pronunciation, easy grammar, but its meaning felt much deeper after everything our family had experienced. Over the following week, I started paying attention differently wherever I went. At the local coffee shop, I watched one customer quietly pay for the drink of the person behind him. At the library, volunteers organized free books for children. At our neighborhood park, teenagers collected food for an animal shelter instead of spending the afternoon scrolling through their phones. None of these people looked like they were trying to impress anyone. They simply acted. Researchers often describe kindness as something that spreads through communities like ripples across water. One generous action encourages another, even among people who never meet each other. Watching these ordinary moments unfold around me, I finally understood that generosity in America isn't only about donations. It's also about creating a culture where helping becomes normal instead of exceptional. Then something unexpected happened inside my own home. My daughter walked into the kitchen carrying her small savings jar. Without saying a word, she placed it on the table. She looked at me with determined eyes. "Mom," she whispered, "I think someone else needs this more than I do." I stared at the jar. It held every birthday dollar, every reward for finishing chores, and every coin she had proudly saved for months. I opened my mouth to answer, but before I could say a single word, the doorbell rang. Standing outside was someone I never imagined would appear at our house, carrying a story that would connect every mysterious act of kindness into one unforgettable truth. The knock that changed everything. Some knocks on the door bring packages. Others bring neighbors asking for a favor. This one brought an answer I had been searching for since the day I first wondered why Americans donate so much. As I reached for the doorknob, my daughter was still standing behind me with her little savings jar in both hands. Neither of us knew that the person waiting outside was about to reveal a story so unexpected that it would forever change the way our family understood kindness, generosity, and the invisible connections between strangers. When I opened the door, I saw a woman I recognized immediately. She was one of the volunteers from the community fair where I had watched the little girl donate her wrinkled $1 bill. She smiled warmly. "I hope I'm not interrupting dinner." "Not at all," I replied, inviting her inside. She looked at my daughter and noticed the savings jar on the kitchen table. "I think I came at an interesting moment," she said with a gentle laugh. After we all sat down, she explained why she had come. She wasn't collecting donations. She wasn't asking for volunteers. Instead, she wanted to thank our family for something we didn't even realize had mattered. A few weeks earlier, my daughter had quietly welcomed a new student who had been eating lunch alone. She invited the girl to join her table without making a big deal about it. That simple invitation had reached the girl's mother, who later shared the story with teachers and volunteers in our community. The woman looked at me and said something I will never forget. "Kindness travels much farther than we ever see." I felt chills. My daughter looked confused. "I only asked her to sit with me," she said. The volunteer smiled. Sometimes that's exactly what changes someone's whole day. Silence filled the room. Not an awkward silence, a peaceful one. For the first time, I realized that generosity isn't measured only by money. Time, attention, encouragement, and friendship can become gifts just as valuable as dollars. Then the volunteer shared another surprise. She told us that several families in our neighborhood had started a small tradition. Whenever they experienced an act of kindness, they tried to pass another one forward within the same week. No announcements, no social media posts, no expectation of recognition. Just ordinary people quietly keeping generosity alive. It suddenly explained why kindness seemed to appear everywhere I looked. It wasn't random. It was contagious. That evening, after our guests left, my daughter gently pushed her savings jar toward me again. Can we help someone together? This time I didn't hesitate. Yes, I answered. But let's choose with our hearts. Later that night, while reading before bed, I practiced another simple English sentence that perfectly matched everything I had learned. Small acts make a big difference. I repeated it slowly. Small acts make a big difference. Simple vocabulary, natural rhythm, real meaning. Those words stayed in my mind because they described our own lives, not just a language lesson. Scientists who study human behavior often explain that generosity creates stronger communities by increasing trust and emotional connection. The fascinating part is that people who witness kindness, even if they aren't directly involved, often become more willing to help others themselves. Looking back, I realized I had become living proof of that idea. One checkout screen, one little girl, one handwritten note, one unexpected visitor. We expected to spend an hour dropping off a few donated items before returning home. Instead, someone there recognized my daughter before we recognized him. What that person placed into her hands a few moments later left every member of our family completely speechless, and finally revealed the incredible journey of that very first $1 donation. The dollar that came full circle. I thought I already knew the ending of this story. I couldn't have been more wrong. The $1 donation I almost ignored had quietly traveled through strangers, classrooms, families, and acts of kindness before returning to my life in the most unexpected way imaginable. Standing at a local community charity event that Saturday morning, I was about to discover that generosity doesn't disappear after you give it away. Sometimes it finds its way back when you least expect it, wearing a completely different face. The event was full of ordinary families enjoying a sunny weekend. Children painted colorful pictures. Volunteers sorted donated food. Local musicians played soft acoustic songs, and neighbors greeted one another like old friends. It didn't feel like a fundraiser. It felt like a celebration of community. My daughter held my hand as we carried a small box of canned food and winter clothes toward the donation table. She looked excited. I hope this helps someone. I smiled. It already does. As we turned around, an older gentleman walked directly toward us. He looked at my daughter for a moment before asking gently, "Are you the young lady who invited the new student to lunch a few weeks ago?" She nodded shyly. The man smiled with eyes that instantly filled with warmth. "My granddaughter talks about you all the time." Everything suddenly became clear. His granddaughter was the quiet girl who had been sitting alone in the school cafeteria. Before I could say anything, he reached into his jacket pocket and carefully handed my daughter a small envelope. "It's not money," he said quickly. "It's something she wanted you to have." Inside the envelope was a simple friendship bracelet woven with blue and yellow thread. Attached was a tiny handwritten note. "Thank you for seeing me when I felt invisible." My daughter looked up at me with tears in her eyes, so all I did was ask her to sit with me. The grandfather smiled softly. Sometimes that's the biggest gift anyone receives. At that moment, every question I had been asking for weeks finally connected. Why do Americans donate so much? Because generosity here isn't only about writing checks or dropping coins into a donation box. It's about noticing people, including people, encouraging people, helping before being asked, giving without expecting applause. I realized the checkout screen asking for $1 had never really been asking about money. It had been asking a much deeper question. What kind of person do you want to become today? On the drive home, our family barely turned on the radio. We spent the entire trip talking instead. Even my children noticed how one small action had quietly spread from one person to another without anyone planning it. That evening, I opened my English notebook again. This time I wrote another sentence. Kindness comes back in unexpected ways. I read it aloud several times, slowly, clearly, naturally. The words were simple enough for English learners. And now every syllable reminded me of a real memory instead of a grammar lesson. I realized that learning English becomes much easier when every sentence is connected to genuine emotion. Behavioral scientists often explain that generosity strengthens trust inside communities, and trust encourages even more generous behavior. Researchers sometimes call this a ripple effect, while one small action inspires another person, who then inspires someone else. Listening to those studies is interesting, but living through one is unforgettable. I wasn't reading about kindness anymore. I was living inside it. As the evening came to an end, my daughter quietly picked up the friendship bracelet and smiled. I'm going to keep this forever. I thought that was the final surprise. It wasn't. Just before bedtime, my husband opened our mailbox and found a large white envelope with no return address. Inside was an invitation that would lead our entire family to an event we never imagined attending. And there, waiting for us, was the unbelievable truth behind the mysterious $1 donation that had started everything. Others stay with you because of what they refuse to explain until the very last moment. The white envelope sitting quietly in our mailbox looked completely ordinary, but inside was an invitation that would lead my family into one of the most emotional experiences of our lives. I thought I already understood generosity. I had no idea someone had been quietly watching our family all along, waiting for the perfect time to show us what giving really means. The envelope contained a beautifully printed invitation to a local community appreciation evening, an annual gathering celebrating volunteers, teachers, neighbors, and families who had quietly made a difference throughout the year. There was no mention of our names as special guests, so I assumed every family in the neighborhood had received one. Let's go, my husband suggested. It'll be fun for the kids. The following Saturday evening, we arrived at the community center just before sunset. Soft lights decorated the entrance. Children laughed while chasing each other across the lawn, and volunteers welcomed everyone with warm smiles. It felt less like a formal ceremony and more like a family reunion where everyone somehow belonged. I loved watching people greet each other. No one seemed to care about jobs, income, or social status. People cared about names, stories, friendships. That simple atmosphere explained more about American community culture than any article I had ever read. As we found our seats, the event host began sharing stories of ordinary kindness from throughout the year. One family had organized meals for a neighbor recovering from surgery. A retired teacher had spent weekends helping children improve their reading. High school students had collected winter coats for local shelters. Every story ended with a pause, but none of the people being recognized looked like they expected attention. Then the host paused. Our next story, she said, began with something so small that almost nobody noticed it. I felt strangely curious. A photo appeared on the large screen behind the stage. It was a grocery store checkout terminal displaying one familiar question. Would you like to donate today? My heart skipped. The audience smiled quietly. The host continued. One tiny donation often inspires another. Sometimes the greatest gift isn't the amount given. It's the example someone leaves behind. I suddenly remembered the day I pressed no. For a brief second, I felt embarrassed all over again. Then another photograph appeared. A child's friendship bracelet. My daughter squeezed my hand. Mom, The room suddenly felt very quiet. The host never mentioned our names, yet every image seemed connected to our family's journey over the past several weeks. She explained that local organizations had been studying how small acts of generosity inspired others to help. They called it a kindness chain, where one thoughtful action quietly encouraged another without anyone planning it. Listening to her, I realized something remarkable. The chain didn't begin with money. It began with attention. Someone noticed someone else. Someone offered help. Someone accepted it with gratitude. Someone paid it forward. That was the real miracle. While everyone applauded, I quietly repeated another simple English sentence in my mind. Kindness grows when we share it. It was short, natural, easy to understand, but after everything my family had experienced, those words carried an entirely new meaning. Researchers often describe generosity as socially contagious. When people witness kindness, they become significantly more likely to perform their own generous actions. Sitting there among hundreds of ordinary neighbors, I wasn't thinking about statistics anymore. I was looking around the room, realizing I was surrounded by living proof. Just as the program seemed ready to end, the host smiled. "We have one final surprise tonight." Volunteers began walking through the audience carrying small envelopes. One of them stopped directly in front of my daughter. "This," she said softly, "is for you." Before any of us could ask why, my daughter opened the envelope. Inside was something so unexpected that every conversation around us seemed to disappear at once. And I knew our family's story was about to take another unforgettable turn. The envelope my daughter will never forget. If someone had told me that a single envelope could make an entire room fall silent, I would never have believed it. Yet, that was exactly what happened. My daughter slowly opened the envelope with trembling hands while hundreds of people watched without saying a word. I expected a certificate, maybe a thank you card, or even a small gift. Instead, what she found inside revealed a truth about generosity that completely changed the future of our family. And it all began because one child chose kindness when nobody was paying attention. My daughter carefully unfolded the letter. A small card slipped into her lap. On the front, it simply read, "The Kindness Circle." She looked at me with wide eyes. "What is this, Mom?" Before I could answer, the event host spoke again. "This card is only given to people whose quiet acts of kindness have inspired others to help someone else." The audience applauded. My daughter immediately shook her head. "I didn't do anything special." The woman standing beside her smiled gently. "That's exactly why you're receiving it." I felt tears forming before I even realized I was crying. For weeks I had been trying to understand why generosity seemed so natural in so many communities across the United States. Now, the answer stood right in front of me. People weren't waiting to become extraordinary before helping others. They simply made kindness part of ordinary life. The host invited my daughter onto the stage. She hesitated. She looked at me. I nodded with a smile. "You can do it." As she walked across the stage, the room became completely quiet. Instead of giving a speech, the host asked her one simple question. "Why did you invite the new student to sit with you?" My daughter thought for a moment. Then she answered with complete honesty. "Because she looked lonely, that was it." No dramatic story, no rehearsed words, just one simple sentence. For a moment, nobody moved. Then the audience stood and applauded. Not because of perfect words, because everyone recognized something beautifully simple. Compassion doesn't need complicated explanations. After the ceremony ended, several parents came over to thank my daughter. One mother quietly shared that her own son had started inviting classmates to join him at lunch after hearing what had happened. Another family told us they had volunteered together for the first time because the story had encouraged them. The kindness chain was still growing. It hadn't stopped. On our drive home, the children sat unusually quietly in the back seat. Finally, my son spoke. "Mom, maybe helping people spreads faster than bad news." I laughed softly. "I think you're right." That evening, I opened my English notebook once again and wrote another sentence. A kind heart changes many lives. I read it slowly, again and again. Simple English, clear pronunciation, powerful meaning. These short sentences had become my favorite way to practice listening and speaking because every one of them reminded me of a real memory instead of an imaginary lesson. I wasn't memorizing vocabulary anymore. I was remembering moments that mattered. Psychologists often explain that children learn values most effectively by observing everyday behavior instead of listening to long lectures. Looking at my own family, I realized that was exactly what had happened. My children weren't becoming kind because we told them to. They were becoming kind because kindness had quietly surrounded them in school, in our neighborhood, at community events, and eventually inside our own home. Just before bedtime, my daughter placed the kindness circle card inside her favorite storybook for safekeeping. "I never want to lose this," she whispered. I smiled. Neither do I. But neither of us knew the biggest surprise was still waiting. The following Monday morning, my phone rang while I was making breakfast. The caller introduced herself as someone from a national organization. She had heard our family's story. What she invited us to do next would test everything we believed about generosity, on a stage far bigger than our own neighborhood. The invitation that reached beyond our neighborhood. I thought our family's story had already reached its happiest ending. Then one unexpected phone call proved that kindness has no finish line. The woman on the other end of the call wasn't selling anything, asking for donations, or inviting us to another local event. She represented a national non-profit organization. I had somehow heard about my daughter's quiet act of kindness. What she asked next made me stand completely still in my kitchen, coffee growing cold in my hand, because I suddenly realized that one ordinary lunch table had started a story much bigger than our family. The caller introduced herself warmly and explained that their organization shared real stories of everyday generosity to encourage communities across the United States. "We heard about your daughter," she said. I laughed softly. "There must be some mistake." "There isn't," she replied. "People need stories like hers." For a few seconds, I didn't know what to say. I had always believed inspiring stories belong to famous people, successful entrepreneurs, or public figures, not to a little girl who simply noticed someone eating lunch alone. The organization invited our family to attend a community leadership gathering where families, teachers, volunteers, and young people would share simple experiences about kindness. There were no awards, no competition, just stories. When I told my daughter, she looked surprised. But I didn't do anything important. I smiled. "You made someone feel welcome," she thought quietly before asking. "Is that important? It can change a life." A few days later, we arrived at the event. Instead of a huge stage filled with bright lights, we found comfortable chairs arranged in a circle. That small detail immediately changed the atmosphere. Nobody was above anyone else. Everyone had a story. One father described how neighbors helped his family after losing their home in a fire. A teenager shared how volunteering at a food pantry helped him overcome loneliness. A retired nurse explained that giving her time after retirement made her happier than she had expected. Every story sounded different, yet every ending felt strangely familiar. Someone had noticed another human being. Someone had decided to help. As I listened, I finally understood something that had escaped me from the beginning. Generosity is not an event. It is a habit. One small choice repeated over and over until it becomes part of who you are. When it was my turn to speak, I wasn't nervous. I simply told the truth. I shared how one grocery store checkout screen asking for $1 had started a journey of questions inside my own heart. I admitted that I had once believed generosity belonged mostly to wealthy people. Then I smiled. I've learned that kindness is measured much more by attention than by money. The room became wonderfully quiet. Several people nodded. One elderly gentleman whispered, "Exactly." That single word meant more to me than a standing ovation. Before leaving, everyone received a small bookmark printed with a short message. Mine read, "The smallest act of kindness is never small." I tucked it inside my English notebook as soon as I arrived home. That evening, I practiced reading it aloud several times, slowly, clearly, naturally. It became another beautiful sentence for English learners because every word was simple, but together they carried a message I would never forget. Researchers have found that meaningful stories often inspire action more effectively than facts alone because emotions help people remember and repeat. Positive behavior. Looking around that room, I realized I wasn't listening to speeches. I was watching kindness multiply through ordinary conversations, one family after another. Just before we walked out of the building, the event coordinator hurried toward us. "I almost forgot," she said with a smile. She handed me a sealed envelope marked, "Please open this at home." I laughed. "Another mystery." She winked. "The best one yet." That night, after the children had gone to bed, my husband and I finally opened the envelope together. Inside was something so unexpected that we both looked at each other in complete silence, because it revealed the final piece of the story. I had begun with one simple dollar and was about to change the way we would live forever. The greatest gift was never the dollar. The envelope we opened that night didn't contain money, gift cards, or an invitation to another event. What it held was far more valuable, and it explained every surprising moment my family had experienced over the past several weeks. As I slowly unfolded the letter, I realized that the story I thought was about donations had actually been about something much deeper. The greatest gift was never the $1 donation. It was the invisible chain of kindness that connected complete strangers, strengthened families, and quietly changed my own heart forever. The letter began with a single sentence: "Thank you for becoming part of the kindness chain." Below those words was a handwritten message from several volunteers, teachers, and community members. They explained that no one had planned our family's journey. No one had selected us. No one had expected our story to spread. Instead, every act of kindness had naturally inspired another, until it formed a circle that reached people we would probably never meet. At the bottom of the page was one final request: "Please continue the story by helping someone when the opportunity appears." No cameras, no recognition, just kindness. I sat quietly for a long time. Then I folded the letter and placed it beside the friendship bracelet, the handwritten note from school, and the kindness circle card. Each item was small. Together, they told the story of our family better than any photograph ever could. The following weekend, we decided not to wait for another special event. We baked homemade cookies. The children decorated simple thank you cards. My husband packed everything into small gift bags. Then we spent the afternoon delivering them to firefighters, librarians, crossing guards, and volunteers who quietly helped our neighborhood every day. Most of them looked surprised. Several smiled with genuine warmth. One elderly librarian held the card against her heart before softly saying, "You have no idea how much I needed this today." On the drive home, my daughter looked out the window and whispered, "Mom, happiness feels different now." I smiled. "What does it feel like?" She thought carefully before answering. "It feels bigger when someone else smiles too." Her words stayed with me long after the conversation ended. That evening, I opened my English notebook one final time. I wrote the simplest sentence of the entire journey: "Giving is happiness." Only 3 words, easy to read, easy to pronounce, impossible for me to forget. Those words had become much more than an English practice sentence. They had become the way I wanted our family to live. Researchers have repeatedly found that generous behavior is associated with stronger social connections, greater life satisfaction, and improved emotional well-being. After everything I had experienced, I no longer needed statistics to convince me. I had watched kindness transform conversations around our dinner table, strengthen friendships at school, deepen the bond inside my marriage, and teach my children lessons that no textbook could ever replace. Sometimes people still ask me, why do Americans donate so much? I smile because I no longer think the answer is about America alone. It's about human nature at its best, wherever people choose compassion over indifference. Wherever someone notices another person who feels invisible, wherever a small act is offered without expecting anything in return, a kindness chain quietly begins. And you never know whose life it will reach next. If my story has taught me anything, it is this: never underestimate $1, one conversation, one smile, or one simple act of kindness. They may seem too small to matter today, but tomorrow they could become the reason someone believes the world is still full of good people. Perhaps that someone will even be you. That is all for today. I will make many more stories like this in the future. Please subscribe so you won't miss the next one.